Alright guys, so if you're anything like me, you've been spending some time in Void Erosion Purge, and unfortunately Void Erosion Purge is a little bit harder than anything we have in the game. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes to share with you a handful of tips to try to make your runs a little bit easier so you can start farming those mats and move to the deeper stages. So one thing to keep in mind is not every gun and not every Descendant is actually good for Void Erosion Purge. This is one of those game modes that is a little bit more challenging than you might think when you first start. This mode really emphasizes guns, gunplay, and elemental advantages. And if you're not fully set up for that, be prepared to really have a tough time when you get in there. But don't worry, most people actually weren't set up for that, and we all have a little period of adjustment. But just keep in mind that you're not just going to be able to use anything you want in order to play this game mode. Now that's not to say that you can't build any Descendant to make them viable, but you're really just pushing a rock up a hill at that point, and you need to really stop and fundamentally understand that this is different than anything we currently have in the game. Void Erosion Purge allows you to build upon yourself the whole time you're in there, and that's something that's a little bit different than what you would have been doing in the past. The important part here is don't think you have to go from 0 to 30 right away. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty hard for you. The big thing here is to utilize the weapon core system and to utilize the cores that drop from Void Erosion Purge to build up to be able to do the harder stages. If you think you're just going to run in and run to the furthest stage, you're going to be really surprised at just how much more complicated this is than you were initially thinking. So the whole point of this is really to tell you, don't feel like you have to push to the end. Get to a spot where you're comfortable and start grinding materials to upgrade your Descendant's weapons so you can move on to a more challenging stage. Don't feel that you need to ego this. There's no reason to push deeper than you're comfortable with and push to a position where you can't actively grind, where the grind is taking you so long that you're failing. At the end of the day, you do want to try to finish whatever stage it is that you're on, even if that means it takes you the full 15 minutes. So just get out there and grind the stages you're comfortable with, get stronger, and then move deeper into Void Erosion Purge. So if you decide that you want to play with a static team, or you're just really trying to set up to figure out what you're doing, it's best to kind of learn one role and stick with it. One of the biggest issues in the First Descendant right now is it takes so long to build characters and Descendants. And if you find that you're hopping all over, building a DPS and then building a support and then trying this gun and trying this gun, what's going to happen is you're going to have very little overall progress in the game mode because you have not built a Descendant and a weapon to carry you further in. This game mode is very, very punishing, and you cannot realistically take half-built Descendants all the way through this. So my advice here is to pick a build, a Descendant, and stick with it until you get further in. Not only is this going to make your time with Void Erosion Purge more enjoyable, this is going to help you understand how the mode works better and is going to help you really grasp the concepts and see how other people are playing before you decide to tackle a different role. In this game mode, elemental advantage is really huge, and it's only going to get stronger as the devs update it and as we progress. You really want to use the elemental advantage to your benefit. Don't be surprised if you take a thunder weapon in against the League of Immortality or the faction, the Immortal faction, and find that you are literally getting wrecked. Now, that's not to say that you can't quote unquote brute force it, but you're going to have a hard time, and there's no real reason to make it that much harder for you than what it needs to be. Now, having said all of that, you do need to play to the elemental advantage that each stage has. And this is why grinding and pushing need to be done in waves. It's going to cost you a lot of resources to build for the 3 different elements that you are going to sort of combat while you're going through this game mode. And while you might be able to skirt by to get from one level to the other, your builds will vary wildly, and some builds will not be as strong as others. So my advice to you is kind of pick a element type that you want to go up against. For me, it was fire because the final stage is fire, and I knew that I would want a very solid ice build to use on fire stages. And then I built really heavily into a ice Descendant. That Descendant eventually got strong enough that I could brute force other stages if I chose to. But at the end of the day, you can get away without doing that if you vary your pushes and your grind. Find a stage or an element that you want to grind, build into that, grind it, and then when it comes time to move up higher, then you can take those descendants or those weapons and put them on descendants that are better in those sort of arenas and use it that way. Or vice versa. You can take the descendants that are better for those damage types and give them a decent shotgun that might be a little subpar, but is just enough to help you get through it. Because on your pushes, your goal isn't to stay there, it's just to get past that stage, get to the next plateau where you really want to be. So talking about pushing and grinding, actually the current meta is a setup for 2 support and 2 DPS. That's not to say this is the team comp that is going to get you the fastest clear times, but it is the team comp that's going to get you the most success and is what basically the whole community has settled on at this point. In general, this is going to net you probably the best results for your average team. So what people are running here is an Enzo and then a Lepic for your support. The reason they're running these is because Enzo gives you unlimited ammo and Lepic groups all of the monsters into one spot and keeps anybody from really taking any damage. The really nice part about this, when you group all the enemies together, it allows your DPS to focus in one spot and they can use AoE weapons to take out the red bars. That way your supports can use shotguns to mainly focus on the yellow bars. All in all, this is a great team comp and one that I use and a lot of other people use. And it's one that I suggest you really look into. Speaking of shotguns, shotguns are in a really great place in this sandbox. I was going to say during this meta, but you know, whatever. Most people are using shotguns for the boss DPS. But if you have an Enzo, you can use a shotgun basically the entire run. And this is something that I really suggest you do. And you build a good shotgun, and the current meta is smithereens, to the element that you're planning on going up against. Now, this doesn't mean that I think you should go out and build 4 different smithereens. Who honestly has time for that? Not your normal gamer. So this is one of those situations where I would build guns around stage 30 or whatever stage you plan on farming in the end, and then just using that gun in the other stages when you are pushing through. I know it's not necessarily going to be the right damage type, but if you spend enough time doing this, the gun will help out and it will carry enough weight to help you push through those stages after you have grinded for it. Now, real quick, I do want to cut in here because it seems like I might be giving you conflicting information, but there's definitely a reason for it. You should absolutely focus on the element type that you need if you are stuck to clear a zone. But if you have really strong descendants and weapons, you can brute force. So when I say use elements to your advantage, that is more for when you are getting stuck and need a little bit of help to get over the hump. I mean, hell, honestly, most people are just going to do Inez solo for the first 20 rounds anyway. But where this matters is when you start getting in the later stages, especially when you start farming the last couple stages. So keep that in mind when you're building and when you're pushing. There's a difference between a grind and a push. When you're playing supports, play around your teammates. If you're the Enzo, make sure you're putting ammo supplies, ammo resupplies near your teammates and in paths that you know your teammates are going to run through. Don't put these out of the way and expect your teammates to go find them. The same with Lepic. Pay attention to where you're pulling your enemies to. Are you leaving any enemies out of your pool? Are you pulling enemies and they're getting stuck on boxes and pillars? Do you need to adjust where you pull that particular pack next time you run? Use these small things and these little cues to help you get better, and it will make your life easier and make your runs that much more smooth. I know it seems like common sense, but literally make sure you're trying to improve at least one thing every run. Do this and you will find that you are enjoying yourself more and you're doing better each run. On this topic, spawn points are basically in the same spot every time. The important part here is just to pay attention to where enemies spawn. Enemies typically spawn out of one of a few different packs, but the locations are always the same. And you can use that to your advantage to be able to move through faster, to plan your reloads, and to plan different movement styles while you're traversing these maps. Another really good tip is actually to use your Ecive. You can use your Ecive to see through walls, and this lets you know where everything is before you come into the next room. You can use this to tell where the high value targets are and where you're going to need to go when you run in that room, especially if a Lepic goes in and pulls the group ahead of time. And if you're the Lepic, It lets you know where the big targets are, so you know where to look to make sure you get everything in your pool. Because nothing sucks worse than destroying a pack and turning to run only to realize that you left some random monster stuck behind a wall somewhere, and now you have to slow down your run. When you get to the boss room, go ahead and tag the boss. This will put a big arrow indicator on the boss, which will help you see the boss, especially through all the damage numbers, explosions, walls, pillars, and other things that can obscure your vision. This is going to help you know where the boss is and position yourself accordingly. Now, on the topic of the boss, I do want to talk about what to do when you have aggro. When you're the person tanking, you need to pay attention to your teammates. Position the boss in a spot that everybody can do damage, with you being the last person in that priority stack. Unfortunately, even if you can't do damage, but you're doing an optimal job of positioning, you are really helping your team out. The goal here is to keep you alive and to keep the aggro in one spot so your teammates can get very close and do a lot of damage really quick. It's more important to me that whoever holds the aggro facilitates damage and doesn't actually have to do the damage. But in an ideal world, you'll find a spot where you can actually do damage as well. But try to stay alive. Your team does more damage with 3 people doing solid DPS than 2 people doing DPS and 1 person rezzing. Also, be a good tank. If you have the aggro from the boss, and you know you do, and it's really hard for you to find a good spot, try to pay attention to where your teammates are on the minimap, and do not train the boss into them. Especially some of the bosses like the poison boss, and a few other bosses have attacks that are very, very lethal. And if your DPS teammates are standing there with damage numbers in their face, they have a hard time seeing the direction the boss is facing. So if you are trying to outrun an attack and you cross paths with somebody, you can very easily get them one shot, and now you have a whole nother situation to deal with. So just try to pay attention when you have the boss's aggro and really try to be a mindful teammate, because there's nothing worse than getting 2 or 3 teammates killed and then having to wipe just over some crazy mechanics and scuffing a run. Honestly, last but not least, do not let social media fuck with you. You are going to see people doing things that are crazy. You're going to see impressive times. You're going to see people running with descendants and guns that just make no sense, but these people are able to clear the content. That's their job. Their job is to do that and make it look easy. And that doesn't make you a bad gamer for not being able to do it. And don't think just because you can see some of the best people in the world doing crazy ass shit that you yourself should be able to do the same thing with random descendants. Those people have thousands of hours in the game, and it's their job to make it look easy. Don't feel bad if you can't do these things. Play your game the way you want to play it and just have fun. Don't let other people influence what you're doing or what you think you should be doing. At the end of the day, just do you. All right, guys, and that's it. I mean, I could have went into way more detail on what to do with each descendant and blah, 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 but I think those are better saved for more specific videos where you're trying to figure out how to play specific descendants, like Lepic. But having said all of that, hopefully you took something away from this tips video. And if you have a good tip or something that you think the community needs to know, let us know down in the comments below. And thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing for more First Descendant content, and always consider coming and checking me out live over on Twitch. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Sorry guys, I guess maybe one last tip real quick. Be careful when you look at guides that are on the internet. Most of these guides are for speedrunners and very specific team comps. And if you don't have those builds don't work, but those creators don't tell you that. So be very, very careful when you use different builds and things like this. I don't know why Judge didn't tell you, but as the editor, I feel like it's my job to try to take care of you guys and fix his fuck ups. So have a great day.